Andre Johnson is going to be the first Texan into the Hall of Fame. But before that, the Texans will play the Bears in the Hall of Fame game. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of the Bullpen.
To throw the punches. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tagged down for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Bullpen. Thanks for joining us. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I see the intro. We got Tank Dell. I cannot wait to see CJ to Tank. I need it. And I don't think we'll get it this week, but we're getting very, very close to that.
We're getting so incredibly close, and I can't wait to actually have to update the theme song. Just from like a video perspective, once we have like more footage of CJ and Tank and Diggs and Colin, I'm just, man, maybe there'll be more defense featured in this one because we'll have some more defensive footage. I just, when I was making that one, I was like, man, CJ Stroud and Tank Dell, that just makes sense. But man, I'm excited for this coming season. And as every season starts, we're starting with the preseason, and the Texans are fortunate enough for the first time since I believe their first season to play in the Hall of Fame game. I think they may have done it one other time. My memory's foggy on when they play in the Hall of Fame game, because for the longest time the season didn't start till the regular season for me. But I'm a changed man. I pay attention to the preseason now. So, and now you guys get to hear Tom and I talk about it because of that. But we're playing the Bears. And this is a preview of a matchup that's going to happen in the regular season. But as we both know, the preseason is a little bit different. So the focus of this discussion will be more on the depth of the team, players that we think will actually get play time during this preseason game, and what we can expect to see, and what position battles we're really interested in as it stands. But before we get into that, Andre Johnson, AJ-80, is going to be in Canton, and shortly after the Hall of Fame game, that Saturday, will be inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's the first Texan to be inducted. And no, I know what you're thinking, Ed Reed. No, that does not count. We're not counting a player who played for half a season in Houston and didn't, frankly, do very well as the first Texan into the Hall of Fame. Andre Johnson, first Texan in the Hall of Fame. What are your general feelings about this? It feels like a surreal moment for me because honestly, even after it was announced, I still haven't really processed the fact that it's finally happening. I felt like he should have been first ballot, but maybe that's my bias. But what are your general feelings right now as we creep up on that moment?
I feel like it's long overdue. I definitely feel like the body of work that Andre Johnson had was worthy of a Hall of Fame nomination. I'm glad the NFL got it right. I'm looking forward to seeing him put the gold jacket on and be immortalized as, one of the greatest players to ever play the game, because I feel like Andre definitely was that guy, even though it was for a team that didn't necessarily reach the pinnacle of, NFL success and win a title. I do think that, Andre Johnson for, 4 or 5 seasons was arguably one of the top 2-3 wide receivers in the league. And, I'm just glad it's here. I really feel like for the Texans, it's awesome to be able to say that we've got one of our guys in the Hall. I know a lot of people don't necessarily identify with all the Oilers stuff. They're like, well, that's Tennessee now or whatever. But, this is Houston's very own first guy. I don't think he'll be the last. Obviously, J.J. Watt will be shortly behind him. And I'm just looking forward to it. It's going to be a really cool experience. I thought about going. It didn't work out. I'll definitely be tuned in. I'll definitely be, catching it on whatever broadcast and seeing what he has to say and seeing who introduced him, that sort of thing. I think it's always cool when you see them kind of bring back their people in their lives that were very important to him. So it'll be an interesting show.
Yeah, I believe it's Gary Kubiak, I want to say. And they recently put out that Andre Johnson's supposed to speak last, which I think is great. You save the best for last. This is an interesting class. You can only assume the Texans are playing in the Hall of Fame game against the Bears because Devin Hester is also going to be inducted in the same class. You got Dwight Freeney, and I think it's a pretty good class. Now, a lot of the talk initially when Andre Johnson was selected to be inducted was around, as it usually is, the wide receiver position. And, I look back to previous classes. Calvin Johnson's a guy who got in before Andre Johnson. He obviously left the league a lot sooner than Andre Johnson did. A guy who I think had a very similar situation, was on a team that just didn't really do much, but shined in spite of it. I think to a larger degree than Andre Johnson did, which is an interesting comparison in and of itself. But realistically, a lot of the discussions around Andre Johnson's selection of the Hall of Fame centered around guys like Torrey Holt, Reggie Wayne, and other wide receivers who have been waiting their turn to get in, some longer, some about the same amount of time as Andre. And there's some people who argue that maybe they deserved it more. Where do you stand on that discussion?
I don't know how they get there. I mean, obviously rings are a defining mark. The stats, you can look at some of that. I just think when you talk to other head coaches of the time, like, there was nobody you prepped for more on the Texans than Andre Johnson. And there was nobody that probably beat you more from a Texans standpoint than Andre Johnson. I mean, he's got so many highlights where he made amazing catch after amazing catch. There was that one overtime game I think he won, where they hit him on I think it was like a bubble screen. He took it. I think it was
against the Jaguars. Yeah.
Or it was Jacksonville. I mean, so when you think about certain plays that kind of define his career, I mean, he was the big play marquee guy. And yes, Torrey Holt had a phenomenal career. I won't take anything away from these other guys, but I think Andre should be held equal to or greater than, in my opinion, even though it's probably a little biased.
I agree with you, and I think that you put it best when you spoke to him being the true number one wide receiver. The whole discussion around Andre for most of his time in Houston was, wow, the Texans have a wide receiver one. I wonder when they're going to pick up a wide receiver two. And then DeAndre Hopkins ended up being that for just such a short period of time. Realistically, having having DeAndre Hopkins alongside Andre Johnson for like maybe the 2 or 3 years prior to when DeAndre Hopkins actually entered the league would have been amazing to see. But that being said, in that tandem, if we're looking at, prime Andre Johnson with DeAndre Hopkins as his wide receiver too, I think it's a good comparison for what Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt brought in their respective times. They're great wide receivers, but realistically, Torrey Holt had Isaac Bruce, Reggie Wayne had Marvin Harrison. I mean, they had their times as wide receiver one, but they were shorter periods of time throughout their career than what Andre Johnson did as the true wide receiver one for the Texans. So I think it makes perfect sense for Andre Johnson. And I don't think it's a biased thing to say. I think it makes perfect sense for Andre Johnson to be the guy who went in first out of those three guys. But anyway, now that we've talked about Andre Johnson going into the Hall of Fame, let's talk about the Hall of Fame game. So the Texans are playing the Bears. A lot could be made of CJ Stroud versus Caleb Williams if this wasn't a preseason game, and a lot will be made of that matchup in week 2 on Sunday Night Football to start the season in NRG. Do I need to say anything more to get you more hype for the regular season? Probably not. I'm already hyped right now. I'm starting in Indianapolis and then coming home on a Sunday night to the Bears just sounds like the perfect start to the Texans season. So I'm hyped, but in this preseason matchup, we're probably more looking at depth. So going around, we can start on the offensive side of the ball and start with the proverbial, I forgot how to speak there for a second. The proverbial elephant in the room, which is John Mechie. I've posted on Instagram about it, and I've gotten a lot of wide receiver 4 at best. What do you mean? And so on the Texans roster right now, John Mechie at his best can beat out Robert Woods and Noah Brown for wide receiver 4. That is the only vertical movement that he has on the depth chart, unless there's an injury, fingers crossed, knock on wood, to any of the 3 guys that are sitting at wide receivers 1 through 3. So with that in mind, what do you think? Do you think the Texans maybe roll out Mechie at wide receiver 1? Do you think, what do you think the combination of receivers we see to start the game is? And what do you think do you think the Texans are placing a lot on the preseason games for how they're going to order the back end of the wide receiver depth chart?
I think the Texans are being very cagey about how they're going to do it, because if you went right now to your computer and you went to the Houston Texans page and you go to depth chart, you get, sorry, page cannot be found. They're not even listing it on their own website. So they don't want you to know who their guys are. If you
Jeez.
go to ESPN, however, you do get sort of a depth chart there. It's interesting because their second string guys are Noah Brown, John Mechie, and Robert Woods. So take that for what it's worth. I feel that that's probably pretty accurate. We just have to see. Obviously, preseason is where those things kind of change, where a guy like Ben Skoranek could move to the top of the table. Xavier Hutchinson could move to the top of the table. So, and obviously excluding 1, 2, and 3. We're talking 4, 5, and 6, right?
Of course. And I mean, obviously they brought in a lot of good names in Quintez Cephas, Ben Skoranek, and Xavier Hutchinson is still on the roster. A 6th round pick from last year's draft, a guy that I think a lot of people saw filling maybe more of a Deebo Samuel type role, had some positive showings and has experience in the system. But still there's this question around if he can crack the roster. I recently posted a clip from the NFL's full season preview for the Texans that they put out on their YouTube channel. And that clip talked about the secondary, which we can talk about later. But throughout the whole 10-minute video, there was a point where they spoke to the wide receiver room, and much like, so I would equate it to the Texans right tackle situation, where a lot of the national media looks at the Texans right tackle situation, sees that they drafted Blake Fisher in the 2nd round and goes, oh, Titus Howard's going to stay at left guard, and the Texans are preparing for life with a new right tackle because they like what they saw from Titus Howard, which is not a statement that's based in reality or is spoken by anyone who watched the Texans offensive line play this past year. But the national media, especially at positions, I don't want to say it's not a premier position, but right tackle is not a position the national media is looking super closely at. It's not like left tackle with Laramie Tunsil. But with that in mind, when they look at the wide receiver room, they have observations that are very similar to what I said, but I think a lot of people see Robert Woods making this roster. And I'm not saying that that's not a sure thing. I think that Robert Woods definitely has a good chance. We've spoken at length about this, about, being the veteran / vibes guy versus what he actually contributed on the field. We saw him early last year pick up the slack while Dalton Schultz kind of got adjusted to the scheme and fill that safety blanket role for CJ early on. Some people might be shocked to see that Robert Woods put up 500 receiving yards last season. Noah Brown put up 600. Granted, he put up, 300 of them in a 2-game stretch, but that's neither here nor there. These are the guys that the national media views as not only making the roster, but being on, just right behind Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's like a prospects versus parades discussion where it's like, now that the Texans have to decide, do they want the prospect of Mechie, or is Mechie no longer a prospect? And they don't have to make that decision right now, right? But like in terms of his position being wide receiver 4 versus wide receiver 6, it's like, do the Texans? I don't think they view him as someone who's leaving the roster anytime soon. It's just not the vibe that I get from how they've talked about him, how they view him. But do they view him as a guy who can? They've talked about him being 100%, and it's a touchy subject when you talk about John Mechie with the cancer and with not being fully right after tearing his ACL towards the end of his college career. This is widely perceived as the first season where John Mechie is 100%. CJ has said it. Several other people in the Texans offensive room have mentioned it, noted it. And so if he is 100%, is he wide receiver 4, or is he just barely on the roster? And that's a question that I guess we'll see answered throughout the preseason. Do I think the Texans are looking at his performance? I'd expect to see him see the field a lot throughout the preseason. I'd be surprised. Honestly, I know that I think the Titans new head coach had said that like everyone is playing and we don't care. But I don't know if the Texans will take that same philosophy. We'll probably see at least a drive from the starters, but I'd be surprised if we saw much more than that at any point in the preseason. But looking ahead, actually, before I move on, do you have anything to say to what I just said? I don't want to just move on without hearing what you have to say.
When I think about everybody not named Nico, Tank, and Stephon, I feel like John Mechie's probably in the next tier of all those other guys that we just named: Noah Brown, Robert Woods, Ben Skoranek, Xavier Hutchinson, Jimmy Johnson III, Quintez Cephas, and Steven Sims. Of all of those guys, the least likely guy for me to not be on this roster would be John Mechie III. The least likely. He's pretty much number 4 for me. I think you don't invest a second round pick and then not get anything from that second round pick, knowing that you got him coming off an ACL injury, then finding out that he had cancer and then, needed all this stuff. But I mean, it cost you very little to retain him. He's still on a rookie deal. These other guys, I think you could actually save some money if Robert Woods doesn't work out, if Noah Brown doesn't work out, something like that. The other guys, they're relatively inexpensive. So I feel like you're right, 100%. We're going to see tons of John Mechie. I think what they're showing us out of training camp right now is that John Mechie is back, and I saw a clip of him cooking Stingley in the slot, and if he's able to do that to Derek Stingley, practice or not, there's lesser cornerbacks out there that he could absolutely take advantage of for this Texan team.
Yes, and to be fair, I mean, in one-on-ones, you'd expect the wide receiver to win. I'd say upwards of 80% of the time, but I mean, it is Derek Stingley. And Derek Stingley, in a lot of people's eyes, from what has been said out of camp, is the MVP of training camp so far, which I mean, is what you'd expect from your number one cornerback who has something to prove in the eyes of the national media. We're watching Sauce Gardner pick up golf in half a second in the offseason, and he said, it's time to put it down. It's time to get back to work. And it's like, okay, well, Derek Stingley's been at work. He's ready to show who the best cornerback from a 2023 draft really is. But I mean, at the wide receiver situation, we can go deep into that and talk about Steve Sims, is his returner ability and all that other stuff. But I mean, we'll see all those guys take the field. And I think as the preseason moves on, we'll be able to shape a better opinion of what the final roster is going to look like. Just quick plug on the Bleacher Report app. I'll be giving my I'll be doing a live stream on the August 27th to give my take on the Texans final roster. So make sure you set a reminder on your calendar for that. Looking at the rest of the offense, the only other position I can think of that is kind of interest. I mean, we could talk about tight end, where Tegan Quintariano. But realistically, the one I really want to talk about, especially with a recent article from Sports Illustrated, I believe, I don't remember exactly which article it was, with a proposed trade for the Texans, which we've talked about before. But with the running back room, the Texans signed Cam Akers. Joe Mixon has not practiced for most of training camp. I can venture a guess to say that unless Mixon decides that or becomes able to practice in the next couple days, that we'll probably see Cam Akers, Damian Pierce, and Jawar Jordan and Dario Gumbawale in some form or fashion for this preseason game, maybe the rest of the preseason, who knows. But what are your thoughts on Cam Akers and his ability to make the roster? And then additionally, is there a world, and I need to preface this, I don't believe there is, but is there a world where Cam Akers takes Damian Pierce's spot and the Texans maybe trade Pierce to the Cowboys?
Only for the people that are out on Damian Pierce. There is a portion of Texans fans that are past Damian Pierce. He is no longer part of the future. He can no longer be somebody to platoon. They're just so turned off by last season that it doesn't matter what the head coach is saying, which is what I am choosing to listen to, is when you get a ringing endorsement from your head coach about being fast and decisive and just way better looking this go around from your head coach. To me, that matters more than, well, I just don't like how last season went. So the one thing that we've said on this podcast that, I think mattered a lot to me was the fact that Damian Pierce was very critical of himself. He said, look, this system was not for me. I needed to learn. I needed to grow. I'm willing to put in the work. I'm going to do what I have to do to be better for this team. I know I'm not the guy right now, and I can own that and be honest. And I thought that was amazing from him. I think the team think that's amazing from him. And I think he's put in the work, and now you're starting to see it. I know throughout training camp, there's been a couple of instances where he had some very, very good runs. And I think you're going to see a lot of them in this preseason. I think there's no scenario where Dameon Pierce is not on this roster. I think, if anything, the Cam Akers acquisition potentially brings into question whether Dare Ogunbowale is on this roster or whether the recent Jawar Johnson draft pick is on this roster. Jordan, I'm sorry. Thank you.
It's all good.
I do believe that Cam Akers being a veteran in the league, if you would have told me they could have got him and saw him in this shape, I think a lot of why Cam Akers is on a roster right now is because he was working out and they brought him in. He looked good coming off an injury where I think during the draft he was kind of an unknown at the time. So it made sense to add a running back. Now, can Jawar Jordan be on a practice squad and then fill a slot next year, something like that? Absolutely. But I think they're going to, much like John Mechie, I think they're going to give Dameon Pierce the same amount of leash to try to grow into the player that they think they drafted. Because I do believe that when Nick Caserio invests draft capital in you, he's trying to receive a return on that investment. So will he own up and say it didn't work? Yes. Will he not jump to conclusions to do that? For me, I don't think he will.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, and I think that the biggest thing, and I mean, honestly, it kind of reminds me of our discussion on Kamari Lassiter, where when the coach is saying something about a player, I kind of have to be like, okay, well, the coach knows what he's seeing in that player and what he's going to get. I guess the difference being their experience level. But I agree. I mean, I don't see Dameon Pierce moving. I think the projected trade in the article was like for a 6th round pick. In my mind, I'm looking for at least a 5th round pick before I move on from Dameon Pierce, because that's one round back from where he was drafted. It's reasonable degradation of value. You're selling potential. The Cowboys just signed Ezekiel Elliott, so they have no reason to not give up a 5th round pick to get a running back that's younger, better, faster, stronger, whatever you want to say about it. But my biggest thing is with the Cam Akers situation is that I've grown attached to a lot of the depth in the running back room. Obviously, Dameon Pierce, to me, I believe he still has the ability to become that bruiser, that 1-2 punch to Joe Mixon. I think with Joe Mixon in the room, he stands to learn a lot and to get a lot better. I think that Jawar Jordan is a little bit older for a running back drafted out of college, but I think that he brings great potential as a deep piece, maybe a 3rd down guy for screens or something like that. I mean, Dare Ogunbowale, outside of the field goal that he kicked in his contribution on special teams, as just looking at it as a running back, is the odd man out in my eyes, and that is not a guy that I want to see leave the roster. Mainly because of how important he was in critical situations last season, and because I understand that Frank Ross is one of the best special teams coordinators, and he speaks highly to Dare Ogunbowale's special teams contributions, which to me is enough to warrant him still being on the roster. So I'm interested to see how the running back position unfolds. I think in all likelihood, Cam Akers would have to do above and beyond to earn a spot on the roster. And I think he was mostly brought in because of Joe Mixon being injured at the moment. But we could see that unfold over the whole preseason with the new rules that were enacted last year. I mean, it'll be 4 Eastern on August 27th when they have to have the rosters cut down, and that they don't have any cut down days in between. We'll see players leave the roster, but they don't have to have it set up until then. So, but we'll see how it goes. Moving over to the defensive side of things, what is a position on the defensive side of the ball that you have your eye on, that you're going to be watching during this game to see, what's going on?
I feel like linebacker, right? I feel like that's probably an interesting, I guess, who's getting those first reps at linebacker, because depth there seems kind of sparse. So you're looking, I think, to fill depth slots with those guys, hopefully, making some plays or just, making good solid tackles, making the right reads, that sort of thing. When you talk about guys like Jake Hansen, Neville Hewitt, Deshaun Phillips, those are guys, they're probably bubble guys maybe, because you've got younger guys like Jamal Hill or Jacob Phillips that's getting a lot of, I think, notoriety in training camp.
I'm hype about Jamal Hill, and Jacob Phillips is everyone's candidate to be the next Blake Cashman. And if that's the case, that is something to be excited about.
So I feel like those guys are going to get a lot of run too. And out of those 5 guys, you're probably looking to get 3 spots. So it'll be interesting to really see if any of those guys stand out, if any of those guys make plays to try to stay on this roster, because you only get 3 preseason games, so it goes really quick. I mean, everybody else gets 2, but the Texans will get 3 preseason games. So it'll be very important for those guys to kind of show, hey, I can play at this level, or maybe I need to be something practice squad, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
And if I'm not mistaken, Neville Hewitt has been a longtime special teams contributor. Jake Hansen, I believe, is also in that same boat. Both guys have been on the roster for a couple seasons, and I feel like kind of endured the bad years and made it to what is now the new Texans roster, along with Frank Ross, due to their skills on that side of the ball. So I think that Deshaun Phillips is a guy who maybe has to show something, because when you get into the depth in the linebacker room, you're going to be playing special teams. So it's more about, can you be a special teams contributor and, when called upon, step onto the field as a linebacker and do your job. So I agree with you on that. If I'm looking at it, I mean, there's a lot of angles you could approach from. The whole defense has position battles and questions surrounding it that are interesting to see. I'm going to kind of do a cop out. I feel like I'm catching 2 position groups here, but I'm just going to say the secondary, and call out, safety and cornerback. I just feel like there's too much commingling in those 2 position groups for me to not say both, because realistically, it's going to be our first opportunity to see the Texans cornerback 2 position is in a position where we're going to see who they think the starters. They're not going to play depth at that position and see who's making the roster. They'll throw out Kamari Lassiter and they'll see what he can do to start the game. And then, obviously it'll be short-lived, but they're going to be looking at who's starting in that position. They're not looking at depth in that position.
So let me ask you this, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I had this teed up. Do you make anything out of that conversation based on what you just said, if Jeff Okudah starts on one side and Kamari Lassiter starts on the other? What does that tell you? I would
say, so that being said, Derek Stingley's not going to start the game. He might, right? They might give him a drive, but if they don't give Derek Stingley a drive, if they truly do what most are expecting and let the starters sit for this game, they have 4 preseason games, and the starters will get their run at some point, maybe at home, give the fans a chance to see the starters for a drive, right? But Derek Stingley, I would assume he's not going to be in on that first drive. I would assume that it's going to be some combination of Jeff Okudah, Kamari Lassiter. If they don't view Okudah as a potential starter, we'll see whoever they view as Kamari Lassiter's direct competition on the other side. And so I think that we're for sure going to see Kamari Lassiter at cornerback 2 regardless, but whoever they play at cornerback 1 is going to be the guy they see as like the competition to be there. They're going to be looking at both those guys and they're going to say, okay, is it the Rook or maybe does he need some time? Is he not ready? Like, they've been hyping him up as ready the entire training camp period. I've heard no one say anything bad about Kamari Lassiter. You could point to some footage. Like I said earlier, in one-on-ones between a cornerback and a wide receiver, the wide receiver should win 80 to 90% of the time. So if you show me footage of Kamari Lassiter getting cooked by Stephon Diggs in a one-on-one, I'm not gonna factor that. If he wins a one-on-one, which there is footage of him doing that against Nico Collins, taking an interception in a one-on-one, then I'm like, okay, that's impressive. Like, it's like defensive line, right? Nine times out of 10, your job is just to be in the right place, fill a gap. If you can get through and sack the quarterback, that's cool. If you sack the quarterback, it's impressive. If you stay in your hole and you don't win the block, I'm not like mad about it as long as you're not out of position, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, okay, I'll let you hear.
I'm glad you brought up being out of position, because to your point, talking about one-on-ones, there is tape of Kamari Lassiter getting absolutely cooked by Nico Collins for like an out and up. It was an 80 yard. Now, my thing is, while I'm not dogging Kamari for that, what I will say is that on that 5 yard out that Nico took and put his foot in the ground, cut back and was gone, I need Kamari Lassiter to be able to make that tackle. I'm not saying he doesn't make the catch. I'm saying I need you to be able to make the tackle. Now,
here's my counterpoint to that.
Was he in a position to make the tackle? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. And you know why? You know why he wasn't in position? Nico Collins is 6'4". Nico Collins has no business moving the way that he did in that video. I don't know if you saw it, but most 6'4" true prototypical number one outside wide receivers are not agile enough to plant a foot like that and make a cut on a dime. That is a Tank Dell cut. That's a Stephon Diggs cut. It is not a Nico Collins typical cut.
I'm aware. However, for him to cut across his face and then go, that's a problem. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter who it was. If that was Stephon Diggs that did it, I still need you to make the tackle. I still need you to be able to make the tackle. The fact that he cut across his body and he overran the pursuit is where I'm kind of critical. Like, okay, is he going to get beat like that by, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a wide receiver right now that probably shouldn't beat him. There you go. Is he going to get beat like that by T. Higgins? I don't want him to. I want that dude
Devontae
to go.
Smith. I don't know. I'm looking at wide receiver 2s in the NFL.
I want that guy to go, okay, catch, fine. 5, 6, 7 yards, whatever. Live to fight another day. Giving up the home run is where I'm kind of concerned.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that was more him reading the body type of the receiver he's playing. And because like, for me personally, if that's Tank, I think he plays it more cautiously and tries to anticipate a cut. But with Nico Collins, I don't think and it's evident in the way he moved. I don't think he ever for a second thought that Nico was capable of that cut. I think he thought big body wide receiver, go up and get it guy on a 5 yard out is probably just drifting out of bounds. And so I'm going to follow him out there. And he got burned. I mean, I'm not going to act like he didn't, but I'm not going to put a lot of weight on that. I think that's a teachable moment. I reckon that the Texans defensive staff in Matt Burke, the DB coach D'Amico probably looked at that and said, "Hey man, welcome to the league. That's a 6'4" wide receiver over 220 pounds. Yeah, he can cut. You got to be ready for that."
But that's the kind of stuff that you only learn by actually having the reps and being in the league and stuff like that. That's why I'm not opposed to him not being the day one starter and putting that sort of pressure on him to make all of those decisions without ever seeing guys. Obviously you play the Titans twice, you play the Jags twice, you play the Colts twice. You're going to be able to see those guys, get a feel for the receiver, and then be a better DB for it because, okay, now I kind of can read his body. I can read the language, that sort of thing. And where I get it. You see him make plays in training camp and you go, this guy, we need him right now. And if there was no one else, I'm absolutely with you. The fact that you've got a couple guys that have been in the league that have also had really good training camps that nobody wants to talk about makes me think it's going to be a competition more than some people are just ready to go, Kamari Lassiter, CB2, are we right? And I'm just like, if he wins it, cool. I want to see
the competition. I'm just... And maybe it's this, right? I'll tell you this. When my wife and I talk sometimes, we'll start a conversation topic and I will be so incredibly sure of something that I'll just make a statement of fact, just sure as all get out that it's correct with no research done on the topic and only the knowledge in my head that I remember kind of, and then immediately find out that I just was absolutely wrong. This is something I'm prepared to do that on. I have enough information from camp to say, I'm not like of the, the train of thought that it's Kamari Lassiter or we riot, but I'm confident enough to say that I believe at the end of this, we'll see Kamari Lassiter line up at CB2 with a significant share of those snaps. I think you could leave camp with like a committee at CB2, and I think that the primary starter will be Kamari Lassiter, and it'll just be in the same way that the defensive line rotates. The starting defensive linemen typically play 60 to 70% of the snaps. There's a whole 30 to 40% of the snap share that goes to someone else. And so I think that's where we could end up with Kamari Lassiter. I mean, and I wouldn't be mad if it was Okuda. I wouldn't be mad if it was CJ Henderson, whoever they see fit to play that position. I've told you 100 times, and I'll tell you 100 times more. Whoever the Texans believe is going to be the best replacement for Steven Nelson at cornerback 2, I'll support it. But the other part of my discussion on the position to watch on defense is the safety position, and it really also correlates to the nickel. So seeing in a game, are they going to put Petrie in? Are they going to play him I reckon that Petrie is once again someone who I think will see a couple snaps at nickel just because it's a new position. They want to get him out there in some in-game. Watch his progression, his decision-making. Going back to that video that I told you about earlier that I shared the clip of on the secondary, if you look at the passer rating and just the general stats around, Jalen Petrie's coverage, I don't want to say I told you so because that's not what I told you. But you've heard me talk about Jalen Petrie, and I think a move into the nickel, a move into what is being called this star safety, not a box guy, not a nickel, but more of a safety that's a star that plays in the box sometimes, is something that could be beneficial for him. He's got a nose for the ball. He can get after it close to the line, but in coverage, he took a step back last year. And I think that it's the perfect situation where you're not taking him out of safety entirely. You're not removing him from something that he should, be able to pick up over time. You're just trying to play more to his strengths. He won some awards in the Big 12 at Baylor, playing in a very similar role. So I'm interested to see how that usage is. I'm interested to see how they play the safety position, knowing that as of right now, and unless something happens in the Justin Simmons situation, which I believe the Texans are still very closely tracking, we'll see some combination of probably not Jimmy Ward, but we'll see the safeties they view as the guys that could play in the stead of Jalen Petrie on the field, and we're going to see who they think is better over the course of this preseason and who's going to start out of MJ Stewart, Eric Murray, and like I said, the Justin Simmons situation at any second, depending on how, because he's an all-pro safety. He's probably waiting for more money than a lot of people are willing to pay him. And so at some point that number drops down into the range of where the Texans are looking to give him. And maybe we see him join the Texans. So though that's what I'm looking at. Do you have anything to say on the Jalen Petrie thing?
So I'd like to ask you this. What do you think is the Texans' base defense?
The Texans' base defense is the nickel. Well, so no, the base defense is 4-3, but they mostly play nickel. Sorry, my bad.
I would think that they would probably start out in a 4-3. First off, I don't think you see Jalen Petrie on what is it? Saturday? Sunday? Thursday. You don't see him because he's a starter. Regardless of what you want to call that position, regardless of what you want to call the formation, I think he is your starting free safety. Right, wrong, indifferent. I mean, like you said, if Justin
isn't Jimmy Ward is free safety. I believe Jalen Petrie is strong safety, right?
Okay, then however you want to flip flop. The depth chart I have in front of me, provided by ESPN, shows Jimmy Ward at the strong and Jalen Petrie.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that. Honest. So
to be honest, I think they're interchangeable in the system. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But for me, I feel like he's going to be a starter regardless of whatever happens. Say they go out and sign Justin Simmons. That could change everything, right? Justin Simmons may start for Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward may be a flex guy. You don't know. I mean, his injury situation is probably equal to, maybe greater than, the situation with what you feel Jalen Petrie's cover skills are, because he's the best ability is availability. And if he can't stay healthy, doesn't matter doesn't matter how we view Jalen Petrie, he's going to play because Jimmy Ward's hurt. So I imagine we see a combination of Lonnie Johnson and Kalen Bullock on Thursday, and they'll be vying for probably the lion's share of that.
Man, Lonnie Johnson, that's a blast from the past. I almost forgot that he's back on the roster. I hope he makes it. I think he's a good special teams contributor, and I'd love to see him back on the team, a more mature and ready to be a part of the culture that is the Texans culture right now, the swarm mentality, if you will. But I mean, I can't say I agree with you to an extent that Jimmy Ward's availability is an issue if he can't stay healthy. But I think that Jimmy Ward, when healthy, is not the guy they're trying to flex. He is a starting level safety, and I think that not enough people are talking about how important his health and his ability to stay on the field is to this Texans defense's success. So I think that if Justin Simmons is signed, it's with the intent of starting him, and it's with the intent of, or it maybe even a split at the safety position between him and Jalen Petrie, with Petrie bumping down to the nickel for a significant portion of snaps. But I think that he could be viewed also as a long-term replacement for Jimmy Ward if health becomes an issue again, but I just don't know if that's the primary reason to sign him.
I mean, if that's not the issue, then I don't know that you just go sign Simmons for the sake of signing him when you just drafted a dude in Kalen Bullock that you feel like could be the guy in 2 years. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing. The Texans have the cap space right now, as far as I understand it, to pay the money that Justin Simmons probably wants right now. And so if they needed a safety and they were in that market, him or Quandre Diggs would probably be on the Texans yesterday. So obviously it's probably closer to a off the bench, or like I said, maybe like a starter with a significant share of those snaps going to Jalen Petrie, kind of thing that they see happening. And when you see it that way, you don't see paying him the money that he wants. So you have an offer on the table, and as you know, less people, it looks like, are interested in paying what Simmons wants. He gets closer to that number, and then all of a sudden Simmons' agent is on the line with Nick Caserio, like, hey, what was that offer y'all had? We'll take it. Like, just get us onto a roster. But he didn't have to be on a roster until deep into training, or deep into preseason, shenanigans. So, I mean, I'm interested to see how the situation plays out, but that's one of the reasons why I copped out and said safety and cornerback. I think there was more discussion.
That was the low-hanging fruit.
It's the low-hanging fruit. And I mean, you left it for me because you decided to go with linebackers, so that's on you. It's your fault.
No, I knew where you were going to go. We all know that you have a bone to pick with Jalen Petrie. This is your guy.
Jeez.
He's in your crosshairs. He is going to be highlighted. Big red, Jalen Petrie. You either do it or I'm coming for you.
Man, if there's ever a player on the Texans roster that's going to see this podcast and is going to be absolutely not happy with either of us, but mostly me, it's going to be him. Man, maybe Dameon Pierce too. I think Dameon Pierce would be like, yeah, Tom, thanks for sticking up for me.
He might send me a signed jersey.
Be like, Tom, for all of your efforts on the bullpen, defending me from that mean man, James, here is a signed jersey.
That'd be a cool story.
It would be. I'd be happy for you. I would definitely remind you at every opportunity I got that I had a part in that.
It'd be framed right over my shoulder, right there. Just be
right over there. I still need to get my Nico Collins and my Andre Johnson jerseys framed so I can put them back behind me. But Tom, do you have anything more to say about this matchup before we kind of bring this episode to a close?
I really feel like it's just going to be cool to see good, wholesome, old-fashioned football. The names on the back, they do matter, but it'll just be about seeing, them lining up on the field and getting ready to go. Definitely looking forward to Andre Johnson getting enshrined. I think that's going to be really cool. But it just really signifies the beginning of the football season. It's all real now. They're lined up, got everything rocking and rolling, going to have fans in the stands, so it'll be fun.
All right. Yeah, no, I agree. And it honestly, when you said that, it brought to mind one more thing that I have to say, which is I'm really interested to see the new kickoff format in game. I'm interested to see how Frank Ross has prepared for it as easily the best special teams coordinator in the entire NFL. Just from what he's done for the Texans before this era and managing to stay on the staff to see it through to now. I am fully invested in, are they going to leave Kaimi Fairbairn out there? Are they going to put another guy out there to kick it and just, try and get as many bodies as they can in the way? Like what is the move? So, but yeah, I mean, thanks for tuning in. We gave you a preview of the Hall of Fame game. We're excited to see real football, as Tom said, as I am echoing right now. And, yeah, I mean, so I am James Roy. I know that if you're watching this, the bottom part, this is an old, background. So sorry if it doesn't have my social media stuff all the way up to date, but you can find me at M1 Texans fan or at, James Roy NFL on X and on Instagram. And that's also how you can find the YouTube channel for the Bullpen is at James Roy NFL. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And he is at TCTom1 on Instagram. It's not private anymore. You can follow him to your heart's desire and keep up with whatever Tom posts about. He occasionally will share my stories on there.
And it's the only one. James is working on James Roy PGA, James Roy MLB, James Roy NCAA, and James Roy MLS. So look.
Actually, my favorite is the one I'm working on. It's James Roy NWSL. Go Dash.
Dash on.
But yeah, so that's where you can find us. There's not any social media pages for the podcast itself. I feel like that would be a waste of space. I think there's actually a Twitter page. I'm logged into it, but we don't ever post on that one. So I guess I immediately lied, and I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. But thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.
Take the handoff. Stroud looking. Stroud.